In this tutorial, we're going to look at the useState hook. What I have here is a stateless function component, and it is rendering what you see on the right, which is a card with a label and some text. What if I want to be able to edit this text? So basically I want to be able to click in here and edit the text that is showing. For me to be able to achieve that in the classes world, what I would need to do is change this component to a class. So we change that to the keyword class. You will notice that I'm using TypeScript in all of the components that I'm building. If you don't know how to use TypeScript with React, don't worry, everything still pretty much works the same, just with some type annotations here and there. All of this goes. And now we extend component from React. And inside there, we need a render function. And all of this is returned inside of the function. And now we need to replace that paragraph with an input. We need to attach the value of the input to a state property. Let's call it name. We don't have it yet, but we'll set that in a moment. Then we also need to attach a change handler. We'll call it handle name change. This doesn't exist as well. So let's go and create our state and the change handler. First of all, the state, I'll just say state equal to an object, which takes with the property of name, and I'll default it to Tony. Then for our change handler, we have handle name change, takes in an event, which is a change event coming on an HTML input element. We just need to tell it where change event comes from React. And what our change handler does is just set the state. So this dot set state makes name, sets name to event dot target dot value. Okay, the value coming from the input. And then the next thing that we need to do is destructure the name from the state. And that name is the one that is being used as the value of the input. Now, when I go back to my card, I should be able to click in there. I get a cursor and I can change that. Now, this is great, but how would we achieve the same thing in a function component using hooks? I'll move over. I'll just add another card in there. And this card is pretty much where we started from with the other one. But I added them both there, and they just have these descriptions at the top so that we can differentiate which one we're talking about at each stage. So in this case, we will do a similar thing to the UI elements, add an input, and we need to attach the value of that input to a variable called name, and we need a change handler. We'll call it the same as before, handle name change. Now we need to create those. We're no longer going to be getting the name from props, so I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to delete this as well. In the hooks world, React provides to us a hook called useState. I'm going to specify that in this case, it takes in a string. So useState should be initialized with a value. And in this case, since our value is going to be a string, I'll initialize it to Steve. Let's just import that from React. Now, the useState hook returns to us a value, which is a tuple with two values. The first one is the actual state variable that we are setting, and the second one is a function that we can use to set that state. So I'm going to assign them here. And the first one, we'll call it name. And the second one, the convention here is that you prefix the second one with the word set and just use the same name that you used on the first value. So we'll call this set name. And secondly, we need our change handler. So I'll call this handle change name. Again, it's going to take an event, which is a change event on an HTML input element. And what it will do is just to set the name to event.target.value. Okay, since we're in a function, we need to actually declare that. And I need to ensure that I give it the same name, handle name change. Change event comes from React. Okay, there we go. And if we come here and test our card, I should be able to click in, get a cursor. I can change that to something else. All right. Now let's take a moment to compare the two approaches. In the first one, classes, the state can only be an object, and you can then set properties inside of that object to whatever values that you want. In the second one, the state can be pretty much any type of value. So it could be an array, it could be a string, it could be a number, and so forth. And beyond that, everything else is pretty much the same. So that's the first difference. If we want to add state to a class, we add a state property and assign an object to it, and then we can add our state variables inside of that object. But if we want to add state to a function component using hooks, we have a hook called useState, and we call useState and initialize the value, and it will return to us the state variable and a setter for that state variable. Now, what if I wanted to add a second row here? So instead of just a name, I wanted to also have a surname. What I'll do is I'll copy the row so that I have a second row, and I'll give it a label of surname, and we'll change the state property for it. The value will be coming from surname, and it will get a change handler called handle surname change. Now we need to create these because they currently don't exist. So I'll go up there, create a surname, initialize it to stock, and for the change handler, I'll just copy this one and just change it, handle surname change. And here when we set state, we now need to be setting the surname instead of the name. We also need to destructure that surname from state, and that should be it. Now, if you look at our card, we do have two rows just like we wanted, and we can edit those two rows the way that we want. Okay. Now let's look at how we would achieve this same thing with hooks and function components. I'll move over to my function component. I'll add a second row, and similarly, I'll give it a label of surname. Change the value of the input is going to be getting its value from a variable called surname that doesn't exist yet. Our change handler is going to be called handle surname change. Now let's create those missing variables. What I'll do here is the surname is also going to be a string, but I don't want to put it together with the name, so I'll just create a second state variable. And that's something that hooks allow us to do. You can have as many different calls to set state as you want, as you need in your application. I'll change the name to surname and just like what I said is a convention, we call this set surname. I'll just start it at a different value called Rogers. And now we need our change handler. I'll just copy that one and rename it to handle surname change. And here we need to set not the name, but the surname. All right. That should work. If I come over here to test it, my surname works and my name still works. All right. Now let's compare the two approaches. If we look at classes, for me to have two values in state, I still need to use an object, and I just have to assign a second property inside that object. And when I want to get it or to refer to it, I just destructure it from the state and use it wherever I want to use it. But I don't have the freedom of separating my state variable. I'm logged into having them all exist in that one object. Whereas in hooks, I can call this useState hook as many times as I want and have my state values separate from each other. That brings us to the end of the first tutorial on the useState hook. I have attached a link to the repository in the description. And if you go to the repository, you'll find that each lesson has been made into its own branch with two commits, the first one for the start of the lesson and the second one for the end of the lesson. That should hopefully make it easier for you to follow along with me. I'll see you in the next lesson.